Hi, and welcome to Season 5, Episode 4 of My Words, Our Journey. Our novel this season, Defender of Children 2. As many of you know, I'm not one for small talk, but I would like to apologize for 2 weeks, 2 Sundays actually, with no episode. A week ago Sunday, my wife and I had the privilege of spending the weekend with our daughters. It was kind of an engagement weekend. Our middle daughter is engaged. Congratulations to Tiffany and Victoria. And this past weekend, well, I have COVID. So we're going to try to get through this episode, a very important episode, very important part of the story as far as I'm concerned. Just a reminder, and I normally don't do this either, but let's just catch up on, since we've missed 2 weeks, where we were last. Till had met with Trish. They had talked at the bar. Trish decided she needed to talk to somebody, so she weaseled her way into the hotel, spent some time with Kenny, and as they were outside and she was leaving, the killer watched and decided he needed to make a phone call. Now, today, we'll start with Chapter 17 and see where that leads us. Chapter 17. That same morning, Till had left for work at 5:45. 6 days a week, he worked at Port Wilmington. Because of his size, he was always given whatever job was the toughest. It had been that way for years, so it was not a surprise anymore. Till was quiet, did not complain, just worked on his work and listened. He was a very good listener. Because he was so quiet, and in spite of his size, others would talk freely as if he wasn't even around, or deaf or something. Tilly listened. He wasn't dumb, and he certainly wasn't deaf. He was streetwise, and had learned long ago how things worked. His days were long and hard, with little pay, but he was happy with the roof over his head and the job that he had to go to every day. He knew many didn't have that. He had no friends, but he also had no enemies, and he was okay with that, too. He did not consider the girl a friend. They were more like step-siblings that saw each other occasionally, and they were both okay with that. There was concern for her this time more than ever before, though. This new mess, it was different, somehow, and he could feel the negative energy around it, to a point where it was distracting him at work, until he was never distracted at work. So, as he moved pallets from the north building to the south, he focused on his job at hand and tried his best to forget about the girl and the retired detective. After his shift, he was more mentally drained than physical. Physical, he was used to. Mentally tired was new. So it was no wonder that he didn't notice the 3 men that had fallen in behind him as he walked after his 12-hour shift. He had sent the girl a text. Now he would go home and wait to hear her reply. That was the best he could do, he thought. When he finally realized the men were walking too close behind him, it was too late. The first blow took his balance, the second and third, his breath. The men were large and swung baseball bats. He probably would not have been able to overcome the men if not for one of their mistakes. To his amazement, one of the men dropped his bat and began kicking Tilly, trying his best to kick him in the head. Tilly blocked most of the kicks, and when the time was right, he lunged the short distance to the bat. Once he had the bat, the odds were now more than even. As he stood, the 3 men again made a mistake by letting him gain his second of composure. That was all he needed, and the fight did not last much longer than that. As he stumbled towards his home, leaving behind 3 bloody bodies, he thought about the girl. Would they be attacking her as well? It was the end of workday for Trish. She had no other appointments. She had gotten her workout in early that morning, so she stopped by her favorite neighborhood deli and ordered her go-to sub, then sat and people watched while she waited for her order. They were not quick, but the sub, well, it was worth the wait. She had seen Tilly's text. She could not understand his worry. He had never been like this before. She would answer him once she got home, got into her sweats, and sat down with her dinner. As she walked from the parking garage, replaying parts of her day, she felt the vibration of her phone. Guessing it was Tilly again, and having her hands full, she decided not to stop and check the message. She'd be home in just a few minutes. Trish heard the footsteps and turned to see the 2 men, one now to her right and the other to her left. They both carried baseball bats and had the look of evil on their faces. Taking 2 steps back, she tried to think fast. She was not out of the garage yet. Should she run? Yell? Both? As if they read her mind, they closed in. The one on the left swung his bat, missing her legs as she jumped, dropping everything in her arms. The next, she wasn't so lucky. On her way down, the bat connected with her right kneecap. She knew instantly she would not be running anywhere. As she lost her balance and hit the pavement, she saw the 2 bats coming straight down towards her head. Instinct caused her to put up her arms and close her eyes tight. Then, nothing. Trish was afraid to look until she realized there was a scuffle going on around her. As she slowly opened her eyes, there stood Tilly, holding his own bat and taking on the two grown men at once. In the end, it wasn't fair. Tilly left both men bloody and hardly moving when he helped Trish to her feet. Tilly had a sad look on his face, and instantly Trish understood why. You didn't cause this, Tilly, but I do need your help to try to fix it, whatever it is. Chapter 18. Kenny, Sean, and Leonard had gone out to dinner. Without saying it, they all needed to get out of the hotel for a bit. The conversation was light. Sports, the weather, that sort of thing. The ride back? Only the sound of the tires gripping the road. The men, each in their own thoughts. As they pulled up to the hotel, Sean was the first to see the pair standing out in front underneath a light pole. Those two probably have an interesting story to tell. Kenny spoke in a flat voice. I'm afraid they're here to see us. He could recognize the woman from this morning standing next to the man that looked like an oak tree, both looking like they had seen better days. Once in the lobby, everyone was introduced and sat around the lobby fireplace. The pair told them their story to the trio. Sean had local police canvass both areas of the attacks, but nothing other than some bloodstains were found. Both were visibly shaken by what had taken place, so Kenny spoke with the hotel clerk and arranged for 2 more rooms to be added to their bill. To be honest, he'd be more comfortable if he knew they were there for at least one night. At the same time the happy group was settling into the hotel, the killer was pacing around his kitchen. He was furious that 5 of his best men could not take out simply 1 woman and 1 man. He did not react well to bad news, especially when it was unnecessary. Now they just made the job harder. Each would be more cautious, may go into hiding or worse, go to the cops. There would need to be contingency plans put into place, calls made. It'd be a long night. The following morning, the killer was informed that the pair was seen having breakfast together at the detective's hotel. After he threw the glass he was holding towards the bathroom mirror, he calmly told the person on the other end of the phone to keep him posted on their travels and to keep 2 teams ready for whatever he needed. Kenny, Leonard, and Sean had gotten an early breakfast and were already an hour into their meeting for the day when Tilly and Trish walked out the front door of the hotel. Neither had decided to listen to the detectives when they urged them both to take advantage of the hotel until things were figured out. They did agree, however, to get some things done for the day and then reevaluate the offer. Tilly was going to work, and Trish to her office. Both were being closely monitored and unknowingly putting those that they were seen speaking with in possible danger. The docks were already buzzing with activity when Tilly arrived. Today, he was told he'd be working and assisting unloading incoming freight at Dock 7. He had worked Dock 7 before. He liked it, for 2 reasons, really. It was the furthest from management, and he liked the foreman there. He was better than the rest. Harry Marks was standing near a pallet smoking when Tilly walked up. Had a few call-outs today, big guy. You're stuck with me, Harry shouted over the truck engine that was passing nearby. The 2 men went right to work. It was hard work, but Tilly needed the distraction. He had not slept well, even in the fancy bed. His mind was twisted. The work helped. Harry was a talker, and so Tilly listened to his stories for the better part of 2 hours. His oldest daughter was getting married, and Tilly now knew everything from the problems with the food to the family members that didn't want to pay to fly south for the wedding. To Tilly, all he heard was the love that his boss had for his daughter. He just wanted her happy. They both had their backs to the warehouse and its parking lot, focusing on the freight that was being lowered at the moment. So, when the unmarked van came barreling up behind them, neither had time to react. The impact took them both, and the van, into the Cape Fear River. Both men were dead before their bodies hit the water. The van sank towards the bottom as the driver swam along the docks towards the designated pickup point. A lot easier than last night, the swimmer thought. At the same time, another van had parked across the street and 2 spots down from the exit Trish would take when she left her office building. The 2 men inside were given very simple instructions. Do not move until she moves, then take her out by whatever means necessary. Simple enough. Trish stepped out an hour and a half later, feeling like she had accomplished all she wanted to accomplish. A stop by the cleaners and the apartment, and then she would reach out to Tilly and see what he was thinking about everything. Once a signal told her she was fine to cross the street, Trish looked both ways and began walking. She was by herself and lost in her own thoughts when she heard the roar of the engine and then the blur of the van coming straight towards her. There was no time to react. The van was upon her. Instead of feeling a death-crushing blow, she heard what sounded like a bomb go off right in front of her. Then she heard the familiar voice, "Get in, now!" The passenger door was swung open and Kenny stared at her from the driver's seat. "Now! We have to go!" The car pulled away from the van and headed north. Kenny did not wait to see if the killers in the van were hurt, alive, dead. He did not want a shootout in the middle of town if any one of them was still able to fight. Trish was stunned first by the van and then the fact that her life had been saved 2 days in a row. "What have I gotten myself into?" she said out loud, but more to herself. Kenny didn't answer. He was in his own head, dreading telling her that her friend was killed only a few moments earlier. The silence ended when Trish broke it with, "How did they know?" Kenny had to tell her. She was a grown woman, and she needed to understand the severity of whatever was going on around her. When he was done, the only thing she could say was, "I hope he didn't suffer." Chapter 19. The van from the dock, as well as the one from Trish's office, had both been recovered. Neither had any prints, and both had been reported stolen the night before, 3 counties over. The same could not be said for the men that occupied the vehicles. They were on the loose, and no leads to speak of. Tilly had not given the men anything to go on before his death, and the men had not pushed him. They had known what they knew now. They certainly would have tried harder, but right after 2 fights and the condition he seemed to be in, it just didn't feel right. Now, the trio were kicking themselves for being more humane than investigator in that moment. A search of his apartment, nothing. Friends, had none. Co-workers, nothing, but good things to say about him. And Trish told him everything she knew about the man, but even that was vague, with nothing really to go on. Trish had not been given a choice this time. She'd been moving into the hotel until this whole thing was over. It had been a long, grueling day, so there was little pushback. By the time everyone left the lobby and headed to their rooms, it was late. Too late for Sean or Kenny to call home. But everyone that had heard the horrible news of Tilly's death and near hit on Trish would have a hard time sleeping, no matter how tired they were. When it began to rain hard, about a half hour later, that was all Kenny needed to finally drift off. Within the hour, the power was out in the entire hotel. The backup generator had taken over and was supplying power to the emergency lighting in the hallways, stairwells, and 2 lights in the lobby. The hotel, with its long corridors and many public spaces, was dark, and the shadows cast by the emergency lighting only added to the eerie feeling the hotel now cast. The one employee, the night auditor, he was standing outside beneath the covered entrance with a cup of warm coffee in one hand and a cigarette in the other, unaware he was being watched. The killer was at the end of the first row, waiting, watching. When the rain had begun to hit hard, he had instructed part of his team to cut the power to the building. Thanks to an unhappy employee, more than willing to help him out for $100, the killer had the room numbers to hit. A large accident had also taken place on the highway a good 15 minutes away from the hotel, and almost all the on-duty officers at this time of night would be at the scene. So, timing would be important, but he was confident his team would be in and out before any real threat to them would arrive. When all team members were in place, he set things in motion. The first casualty of the night was the night auditor, who never heard the man come up from behind him, slit his throat, and while dragging him into the bushes, remove his work keys from the rain jacket pocket. When everyone was inside, the master key was swiped to lock the front sliding doors. They could be broken easy enough, but the crew would not have to worry about anyone else just wandering in before they completed their work. They would be hitting the rooms simultaneously, each team knowing what was expected. This was not their first time working together. As the rain picked up again, outside the killer listened from the lobby as his men moved into place. In less than 2 minutes, the hotel would come to life with the sounds of gunfire. The order had been simple: kill the targets, avoid any other casualties, if possible. When the walkie came to life in his hand and he heard the words, the rooms were empty. The killer was taken aback, but not totally surprised. He had read about his adversaries. They were not rookies. Before he could respond, the walkie squawked again. "You have visitors that will be there in less than 3 minutes." The teams had already headed towards the exits, and the escape vehicles were pulling up front. Each man knew if they were late, they'd be left, no questions asked. The sirens could be heard in the not far-off distance. There was no way to know which direction. But the drivers were excellent. The killer had no doubt if they could at least get rolling, his drivers and the weapons inside each vehicle would win against whatever authorities this little town would throw at them. Usually your best men didn't work the graveyard shift, after all. Tension in the meeting room had lowered at least a level by the time the sirens could be heard. The entire group involved in Leonard's case had been in that room for the past hour plus, thanks to Sean and his small bladder. Those couple of extra drinks had caused him to get up, and when he did, he noticed the power was out, and with a nagging feeling that they all should be safe and not sorry, he decided they should all be together. So he instructed that each grab their pillow and a blanket and gather for a sleep-in. Kenny was on watch when he saw the movement outside the window earlier. Shortly thereafter, guns were pointed at the meeting room doors and windows, waiting to shoot whatever tried to get in. Fortunately, that did not have to happen. None of them wanted to start shooting inside a crowded hotel. No one could have predicted what would have happened next. As the three dark SUVs were moving out, the police were coming down the two-lane road that led into the parking lot to the right side of the property. The way the hotel sat, there was parking on all four sides, but just beyond the parking, on two sides were beautiful large man-made ponds. On the third side, a concrete barrier with the highway on the other side. And the fourth, which is where the authorities and the criminals were, going to hit an impasse. Everyone was now gathered around the windows, and before their eyes they witnessed a barrage of gunfire erupt from the SUVs. The police had no time to react. Instead, they all backed up, blocking the only driveway to the exit. The killer did not anticipate there to be so many cops working that shift. What he didn't realize was that the team he had caused the accident on the other side of town had done a really good job, and the shift that should have gone home had stayed to help. Now, he had 2 shifts worth of cops blocking his exit. The killer had shot first, knowing his men would follow. He wanted them to stop their forward progress and realize they needed to retreat. This gave him at least a split second to think. The longer he waited, the more time it gave others to join the fun. He had to act quickly. A hostage situation was not top of his list. Nothing he wanted, to be honest. So, his lead vehicle led, and the others followed. When they rounded the corner, out of sight of Sean, let out a sigh of relief. It was his fear the trapped killers would once again enter the hotel and look to take hostages. Instead, he, Kenny, and Leonard ran across the hall to the adjacent meeting room, then slowly moved in the shadows towards the window where they could see the men exiting the vehicles and preparing to make their run through the tall grass that enclosed the pond closest to them. It was in none of their natures to sit back and watch the action, so nothing needed to be said as the 3 men held their weapons and moved close to the exit door. The killer heard the yell coming from behind him, but could not make out what was being said. As he turned and spotted the 3 with their guns raised, he took a step back to block their direct line of sight. Were these 3 of the 4 he was looking for? He hadn't really had time to think about it, but I guess he assumed they had left in a rush or had decided to move to a different hotel. Now was not the time to reflect on the night's events. He was hopeful there would be time for that later. Now preservation was the only thing that mattered. After instructing 3 of his men to empty their weapons into the ground just below the first floor windows, he headed off in the direction of the pond, knowing his men would follow, and assuming the 3 would get the hint that if they chose to follow, the next shots would be into the random hotel rooms where there would certainly be casualties. The message was received loud and clear, and the 3 men slowly re-entered the hotel. Kenny said out loud, but to himself really, "Well played." By now, the hotel was buzzing with guests trying to figure out what had happened, and the addition of the police did not do anything to settle the situation. There would be lots of questions, and unfortunately, few answers, and little hope that the professionals had left anything as they tried to take 4 lives that evening. And I think that'll be a good place to stop today's episode. Thanks again for putting up with me while I missed 2 Sundays and for being a little under the weather today, but hopefully you enjoyed the episode and the content, and we'll try to get back on schedule, and hopefully I'll be back to 100% by next episode. Thanks again for listening. I appreciate you, and have a great day.